He used to say, the market doesn't care who you are. It doesn't reward intelligence, confidence, or even courage. It only rewards discipline. Richard Dennis understood this truth better than anyone. To the outside world, he was a legend, the man who turned a few $100s into hundreds of millions. But behind that legend was a mind constantly at war with itself. He wasn't born rich. He grew up in Chicago, in a family that understood work more than wealth. As a teenager, he found himself drawn to the trading pits, that loud, chaotic arena where men shouted numbers like they were throwing spears in a battlefield. He started at the bottom, literally running paper slips across the floor. But as he watched, he began to see what others missed. He saw emotion, fear, greed, panic. The crowd wasn't trading numbers, they were trading feelings. And in that chaos, Dennis saw an opportunity to build something no emotion could touch, a system. He believed that if you could remove feeling from trading, if you could make every decision by rule, not instinct, then anyone could win, not just the gifted few. So he built a formula, pure logic, cold discipline. Price goes up, buy, price goes down, sell, cut losses, let winners run. Simple, brutal, unemotional. By the early 1970s, his tiny starting capital had become a fortune. The man they called the Prince of the Pit had found a way to beat the game by refusing to play it emotionally. He didn't guess the future. He reacted to the present. But here's the paradox. To master emotion, you must first understand it. Dennis wasn't cold. He was deeply aware of fear, not to escape it, but to predict it. He knew when fear would make others sell too soon. He knew when greed would make them hold too long. He made money by understanding human weakness, starting with his own. And that's what made him different. He didn't fight emotion by denying it. He fought it by designing around it. In 1983, he decided to test a radical idea. Could ordinary people with no trading background be taught his system? Could emotion be trained out of a human mind like a reflex? He placed an ad in the newspaper. Hundreds applied. He selected a small group, teachers, scientists, even a security guard. He called them the Turtles. For 2 weeks, he trained them. Every rule, every signal, every position size. He told them, your job is not to think, your job is to follow. And when they went live, it worked. Within months, they were making millions. The experiment was proof. Discipline could be taught. Instinct could be replaced by structure. The market, it turned out, was not unbeatable. The real challenge was the human inside the system. But here's the part few talk about. Even as his students thrived, Dennis himself began to bend the very rules he had created. Fame came, pressure grew. The world called him a genius, and slowly the system turned into a mirror reflecting his own psychology. He began to take risks that weren't in the plan, to trust his feeling again, to think he could outsmart the rules that once made him rich. And when the crash of 1987 hit, the empire cracked. He lost more than money. He lost conviction. He later admitted, the system didn't fail. I did. Those 5 words contain everything about human nature and success. We don't lose because we don't know what to do. We lose because we don't do what we know. That is the psychology of a trader and of life itself. Think about it. Every human being has their own version of a trading system. Wake up early, save money, eat well, focus. We know the rules, but emotion, that invisible hand, keeps rewriting them. Fear of missing out, greed for more, the illusion of control. The same forces that move markets move us. Richard Dennis spent decades proving that a system can make you rich, but his life also proved something deeper, that no system can save you if you can't master your mind. So what can we learn from him? First, success is mechanical, but staying successful is emotional. Building a system takes intelligence. Following it takes humility. Second, emotion never disappears. It only changes its disguise. Today it's fear. Tomorrow it's overconfidence. The war is never over. And third, the biggest enemy isn't the market, it's comfort. The moment you believe you've figured it out, that's when the market reminds you who's in charge. Dennis once told his students, we are not predicting, we are reacting. That sentence sounds simple until you realize it's the opposite of how most people live. Most of us react to emotion and predict outcomes. He flipped it. He reacted to data and ignored prediction. That's how he stayed free for a while. But eventually, even he got caught in the oldest trap, believing his own legend. Because when you become the system, you stop questioning it. And when you stop questioning, you stop adapting. The market doesn't punish emotion, it punishes ego. And maybe that's why his story still matters. Not as a warning against trading losses, but as a mirror for every dreamer who believes control equals mastery. Richard Dennis didn't fail because he felt too much. He failed because he stopped respecting how powerful feeling really is. So when you sit in front of a chart or a decision or even a moment of temptation, remember this. Rules are easy to write, hard to live. Systems are easy to copy, hard to obey. Every trade is a test of self-control. Every click, a question. Are you following the plan or chasing emotion? He once built a fortune by trusting logic, then lost it by trusting himself. And that's the paradox that defines all traders and all human beings. We don't lose to the market, we lose to the mirror. So if you want to think like Richard Dennis, don't study his trades. Study his silence, the moments he hesitated, the moments he broke his own rules. Because inside those mistakes lies the psychology of a trader. A mind brilliant enough to build $1 billion system, yet human enough to break it. After the fall, Richard Dennis disappeared from the spotlight for a while. The man once called the Prince of the Pit faded into silence, not ruined, but humbled. He had built an empire on logic and watched emotion dismantle it, piece by piece. But the story didn't end with his losses, because in that silence, something else began. Reflection. Dennis started to see that the market was never his real opponent. The true battle was between two voices inside him, the system and the self. One demanded obedience, the other whispered rebellion. And in the end, every trader's destiny depends on which voice they choose to listen to. The irony was painful. The turtles he trained, the ones who once looked up to him, had become the living proof that his system worked, even without him. Many of them went on to build their own funds, their own legacies. They had absorbed his rules more faithfully than he did. It must have felt strange to be the teacher, yet see your students become the embodiment of your own discipline, to watch them rise by doing what you once could no longer do. But maybe that was his greatest success, because what Richard Dennis created was never just a trading method. It was a philosophy, the belief that emotion can be contained, that human chaos can be organized into structure. He turned uncertainty into geometry, fear into math. And yet, beneath every formula still beats the human heart. He realized that systems are like armor. They protect you, but they also isolate you. They can make you strong, but they can also make you rigid. That's what the later years of his life revealed. He began to study not only markets, but minds, behavioral economics, probability, the psychology of loss. He tried to understand why people could know the right thing to do and still not do it. He once said, "You can teach rules, but you can't teach conviction." Conviction, that quiet belief that you will keep following the system even when it hurts, even when it bleeds, even when every cell screams to stop. That's the part no one can give you. In a way, his own downfall became his final lesson, that knowledge is useless without discipline, and discipline is meaningless without humility. The markets of today, decades later, are faster, louder, more digital. Algorithms replace traders. Artificial intelligence now scans millions of data points per second, but the core question remains the same. Can a machine truly remove emotion when it was built by emotional beings? Every algorithm still carries traces of the human who wrote it, their fear of loss, their greed for profit, their belief in patterns. Even code in its perfection reflects the imperfection of its creator. Richard Dennis would have understood that paradox because he lived it. He was both machine and man, rule and instinct, logic and chaos. He once built a mechanical system that could beat the market. But his life proved that no system can beat the mind, unless the mind learns to surrender. Imagine him in his later years. The noise of the pit replaced by quiet screens, no more shouting, no more crowds, just silence and numbers glowing in the dark. He would still glance at the charts, still trace the curves of price like old memories. But now, he looked at them differently, not as a battlefield, as a mirror. He understood that every rise and fall on the screen was a reflection of something deeper, fear spreading through millions of people, greed crystallizing into trends, hope collapsing into panic. Markets are not mechanical. They are emotional machines powered by human electricity. He used to think rules could conquer that emotion. Now he knew. Rules could only guide it. The real mastery is to dance with uncertainty, not to destroy it. And that's the shift every mature trader eventually reaches. In youth, we want control. We build systems. We chase perfection. With experience, we realize control is an illusion and perfection is a prison. Richard Dennis didn't fail because he lacked knowledge. He failed because he forgot that emotion isn't the enemy. It's the compass. It shows you where your fear lives, where your pride hides, where your patience ends. To master it, you don't erase it. You understand it. The turtles who followed him learned this in their own way. Many of them later said that Dennis taught them how to see beyond the screen, to see themselves in every trade. Some never met him again. Some kept his principles alive. Others drifted away. But his legacy lived on, not in wealth, but in wisdom. That even in $1 billion mind, there's a fragile human heart. And maybe that's what makes his story so universal. Because we're all traders in some way. We trade comfort for dreams, time for freedom, security for meaning. And just like in the market, we follow systems, habits, routines, beliefs, until one day emotion breaks through, reminding us that we are not machines. The question is never whether the system works, it's whether you do. Whether you can hold steady when your world moves against you. Whether you can stay rational in a storm of noise. Whether you can trust your own process when everyone else panics. In that sense, the market becomes a mirror for life itself. Richard Dennis once mastered it, then lost it, then understood it, not as a system to conquer, but as a rhythm to respect. He proved that success is not about winning every trade. It's about learning every time you lose. And when the story of his life finally closes, it won't be remembered for the millions he made or lost, but for the question he left behind: can a human mind ever truly rise above emotion? Maybe not, but perhaps the point isn't to rise above it, it's to rise through it. There's a moment in every trader's life when the screen goes silent. The market stops moving, the numbers freeze, and you're left alone with your thoughts. No charts, no signals, just you and the weight of your own decisions. That's where Richard Dennis found himself, long after the noise faded. The man who once made a fortune by following rules was now searching for meaning beyond them. What happens when you've mastered the system but lost yourself in it? He began to see patterns not just in price, but in people. The same cycles he once tracked in markets, rise, peak, collapse, recovery, also existed inside the human mind. Every victory carries a seed of arrogance. Every loss plants a seed of wisdom. And only those who tend to the second one grow. Dennis's story became less about trading and more about philosophy. The way he spoke, the way he taught, even the way he looked at a simple price chart, everything became a meditation on human behavior. He realized that markets are not logical places, they are emotional mirrors. Every tick is a reflection of collective psychology: fear of missing out, hope for recovery, denial of reality, acceptance of loss. He once told a student, "You don't trade the market, you trade your beliefs about it." That sentence, quiet, almost simple, contains an entire universe, because it means every trade, every decision is a projection of what you feel is true, not necessarily what is true. And the more you believe, the more dangerous it becomes. He began writing his thoughts down, not as rules, but as reflections. He no longer cared to predict or control. Instead, he searched for patterns in behavior. He wrote that emotion doesn't disappear with success, it simply changes shape. In the beginning, fear of failure drives you. Later, fear of losing success traps you. Either way, you're still afraid. And that's when he understood. The ultimate freedom isn't having no emotion, it's not being controlled by it. He had spent decades teaching others to detach. Now, he learned to feel without reacting, to let fear pass through without grabbing it, to let excitement rise without chasing it. That's the evolution of a trader, from reacting to reflecting. He compared it once to surfing. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to ride them. The market will always move. The question is whether you move with it or drown beneath it. And this wisdom, earned through losses and solitude, turned him into something more than a trader. He became a philosopher of risk. He stopped calling it the market. He started calling it the teacher, because every loss teaches humility. Every gain tests it. He would say, the market is a mirror, and most people can't stand to look too long. In his later talks, he rarely mentioned the millions he made. Instead, he spoke of patience, silence, and surrender. How success without peace is just another form of failure. He watched the world change, Digital trading, algorithmic precision, data driven, everything. But deep down, he knew nothing had really changed. Because beneath every algorithm still beats a human pulse. Beneath every chart still hides emotion, and he would smile quietly at those who thought technology had conquered psychology. Because he knew the truth. Machines can calculate speed, but not fear. They can measure volume, but not greed. They can follow rules, but they cannot doubt. And doubt, he believed, is the most human quality of all. It's doubt that keeps you humble, doubt that makes you question your certainty, doubt that prevents you from becoming your own downfall. Dennis no longer tried to defeat the market. He learned to converse with it. Each trade became a question, each loss an answer, each recovery a lesson. He had built a $1 billion mind. Now he sought a peaceful one. And maybe that was his greatest trade, exchanging ambition for awareness. He said once, at some point, the goal stops being profit. The goal becomes understanding. Understanding yourself, understanding fear, understanding that emotion is not weakness, it's information. And perhaps that's what he wanted to teach all along. Not how to win against others, but how to stop losing to yourself. Because the market doesn't punish you for being wrong, it punishes you for staying wrong. So he began to see life the same way he saw price movement, as trends, corrections, reversals. You rise, you fall, you learn, you rise again. He lived quietly toward the end, no longer chasing fortune, no longer proving anything. But his legacy, his philosophy, spread like ripples through generations of traders. The turtles became mentors, their students became teachers. And the system that began in one man's mind became a mindset, a discipline that outlived him. It's poetic, really. The system that beat emotion was born from a man who spent his life learning to live with it. So when you open a chart or make a choice or face a fear, remember this story, because you don't need to be a trader to understand Richard Dennis. You just need to have lost something you thought you controlled: money, time, a dream, yourself. The question isn't whether you'll lose again. You will. The question is whether you'll learn this time. Richard Dennis once mastered the market, then he mastered himself. And in that order lies the secret, because wealth without wisdom fades, but wisdom earned through loss endures. So, in the end, the psychology of a trader is the psychology of being human, falling, learning, rising, and finally understanding that mastery isn't control, it's peace. He used to say, if you listen long enough, the market starts to sound like breathing: expansion, contraction, inhale, exhale. And somewhere in between those rhythms, life hides its lessons. In his final years, Richard Dennis wasn't chasing opportunity anymore. He was observing, quietly, patiently, watching the same patterns play out, over and over, just in new disguises. The faces changed, the screens got brighter, the algorithms got faster, but the story stayed the same. Humans, still trapped in their emotions: greed, fear, hope, regret, the four horsemen of every collapse. He often spoke to young traders who came to seek advice, expecting formulas, secrets, or strategies. He would listen to their excitement, their plans, their dreams of fast profit, and then instead of giving them rules, he'd ask a question: why do you trade? Silence, because most didn't know. They wanted freedom, but were slaves to greed. They wanted success, but feared patience. They wanted control, but refused discipline. He told them, until you know why you trade, every gain will feel empty. Every loss will feel personal. He had learned that lesson the hard way. There was a time when he believed systems could make people rational, that data could defeat emotion. But in truth, systems don't remove emotion. They reveal it. They show who you are when nothing goes your way. He realized that the charts were never the battlefield. The battlefield was the mind. Every candle, every movement, every reversal was just a reflection of human behavior magnified. The crowd's panic, the herd's greed, the individual's doubt. And so, in his later reflections, Dennis turned from strategy to philosophy. He began writing privately, not about entries and exits, but about patterns of thought. He wrote about how fear and desire were not opposites, but twins. Both are born from attachment, to outcome, to identity, to the illusion of control. He wrote that markets are not chaotic. People are. The market merely amplifies what already exists inside us. To him, trading became spiritual, not in religion, but in awareness. Every loss was a meditation on humility. Every profit, a test of detachment. He wrote, when you stop needing to win, you finally start to see. That's when the noise quiets. That's when the market speaks. He understood that success is not about never losing, it's about not losing yourself when you do. That truth turned him from a trader into something else, a philosopher of impermanence. He often said, "We don't own profit, we borrow it until the market takes it back." And that's how he began to see life too. Everything borrowed, nothing permanent, not wealth, not fame, not even certainty. The older he got, the softer his tone became. There was no bitterness, no regret, just understanding. He saw that all systems, trading systems, belief systems, even moral systems, eventually face the same test, the chaos of reality. And the ones that survive are those flexible enough to bend without breaking. He taught that principle to anyone willing to listen. Your rules protect you, he said, but only if you know when to let them breathe. That was his evolution, from rigid perfection to living adaptability. He would compare it to sailing. A good captain doesn't fight the wind. He reads it, adjusts his sails, and moves with it. A system should serve you, not imprison you. That was the maturity of a man who once believed control was everything, and later learned acceptance is stronger. In the quiet of his later life, he no longer stared at flashing numbers. He walked, he read, he thought. But every now and then he'd look at a chart and smile, because he could still see the story written in it, not the numbers, the emotions behind them. A sudden spike, hope, a slow fall, denial, a violent crash, panic, a gentle recovery, faith. It was humanity painted in price, and perhaps why his teachings still echo decades later, because he didn't just leave behind a trading system, he left behind a way of seeing, to observe without judging, to act without clinging, to lose without breaking, to win without pride. Those aren't trading lessons, they're life lessons. When people asked him near the end what advice he'd give to new traders, he said only this: don't try to control the market. Learn to control what the market triggers inside you. That's where all mastery begins. Because emotion never disappears. It just changes its costume, sometimes as excitement, sometimes as fear, sometimes as certainty. But underneath, it's the same test. Can you stay calm when everything moves? And if you can, you've already won, no matter the result. In his final reflection, he wrote a single line that felt like a farewell. The best traders are not those who conquer chaos, but those who become calm enough to listen to it. Maybe that's the essence of his journey. From noise to silence, from ambition to awareness, from chasing wealth to understanding peace. And that's the paradox of Richard Dennis, a man who built one of the greatest trading systems in history, only to realize that the most valuable system was the one inside his own mind. The market made him rich. The losses made him wise. But the silence made him whole. There's a strange calm that comes after the storm, a silence that feels both empty and full at the same time. That's where Richard Dennis spent his final years, in that quiet middle ground between memory and meaning. He no longer looked at markets as a battlefield, but as a language. Every tick was a syllable, every wave of price a sentence written by millions of hearts beating in unison. He used to read charts for profit. Now he read them for truth. He would say, "The market doesn't lie. It just reflects what we refuse to admit." And he was right. Because every crash begins long before the numbers fall. It begins when people believe they're untouchable. Every bubble inflates from the same illusion, that this time is different. But it never is. Dennis had seen it all. The gold rush of 1979, the oil mania of 1980, the tech explosion of 2 Kong Kong Kong, the housing collapse of 2 Kong Kong Tam, the digital euphoria of 2 Kong Hai Kong. Each time he watched the same rhythm play out: euphoria, greed, denial, collapse, regret. He called it the emotional business cycle. And it didn't just apply to markets, it applied to people, to nations, to life itself. He would tell his students everything that grows too fast forgets its roots, and everything that forgets its roots eventually returns to the soil. That's how he saw wealth: temporary, rotating. A visitor, not a resident, but that didn't make him cynical. It made him wise. Because once you accept impermanence, you stop clinging. And when you stop clinging, you start seeing. He often quoted an old phrase: markets are never wrong, opinions are. To him, that wasn't just about trading, it was about ego, about how people build identities around being right, and how dangerous that becomes when reality disagrees. He learned painfully that being right doesn't matter if you can't stay disciplined, that intelligence means nothing without humility, that systems protect you until pride makes you ignore them. That was the hidden cost of success, the illusion of certainty. He said, the higher you rise, the more invisible your arrogance becomes. That sentence haunted him because he had lived it. He could still remember the smell of the trading pit, the heat, the sweat, the paper flying through the air, the rush of power when a position went his way, the crushing silence when it didn't. That was the real addiction. Not money, but motion. The feeling of control in a world that could never truly be controlled. He realized that trading was never about predicting the market. It was about predicting your own behavior when things went wrong. And that's where most people fail, not in strategy, but in self-awareness. He wrote, "The market is a mirror that punishes denial." Every trader who breaks eventually breaks in the same place, where discipline ends and emotion begins. Dennis called that moment the crack, the thin fracture between knowing what to do and doing it. The entire fate of a trader, of any human being, lives in that crack. To bridge it takes more than intelligence, it takes surrender. He said, the market rewards humility disguised as patience. It's a strange kind of wisdom, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers, that doesn't predict but observes, that doesn't fight but flows. He began to see trading as an art of awareness, not about control but presence, not about forcing outcomes but noticing signals, both outside and inside. In his journals, he wrote that the real chart was never on the screen. It was in the mind, with its own peaks and valleys, its own cycles of greed and fear, its own resistance and support. He laughed once, saying, every trader wants to find the perfect entry, but the real entry is when you learn to see yourself clearly. And maybe that was his final revelation. That wealth is just a side effect of understanding. That trading is not a job, but a meditation on uncertainty. That success is not the absence of loss, it's the ability to stay centered through it. In one of his last recorded interviews, when asked what advice he'd give the next generation, he paused for a long moment and said, don't seek the feeling of winning, seek the state of clarity. That's what remains after everything else fades, because profits come and go, systems rise and fall. But clarity, that rare, calm awareness, that's the only real edge that lasts. He smiled as he said it, his voice slower, gentler than before. The market, he whispered, is just a story. And every story is about the same thing, learning to listen. He had spent a lifetime trying to control that story. Now he was finally free from it. And maybe that's what peace looks like, not in the absence of chaos, but in the ability to see beauty within it. Richard Dennis didn't just study markets, he studied the mind. And through his victories and defeats, he left us one timeless truth, that the greatest trade you'll ever make is exchanging control for understanding. Because when you stop chasing certainty and start listening to reality, that's when you truly begin to win. He used to say, markets don't end, they only pause, like the tide before another wave. And maybe that's why he could never fully walk away. Because for Richard Dennis, the market wasn't a place. It was a mirror of existence, alive, breathing, unpredictable, merciless, and strangely beautiful. In his later years, he began writing not for traders, but for thinkers. His notes read like meditations, not instructions. Every price, he wrote, is a confession of belief. Every belief is a reflection of fear. He had come full circle, from logic to loss, from control to surrender. The man who once believed he could systemize emotion had now learned to feel it without being consumed. He lived simply. No luxury, no crowds. He'd wake early, make coffee, open the same laptop he'd used for years. But he didn't chase trades anymore. He just watched, quietly, almost reverently, the ebb and flow of the charts. Sometimes he'd pause and smile. He saw life written in those moving lines. The optimism of a slow climb, the arrogance of a peak, the humility of a crash, the resilience of recovery. To him, every chart told the same human story. Hope, overconfidence, collapse, awareness, rebirth. He used to tell visitors, if you really understand this pattern, you'll understand everything. Love, fear, business, history. It's all the same rhythm. The market, he realized, was not about money. It was about human nature repeating itself. He would meet some of the old turtles from time to time. They were older too now, some gray-haired, some retired, a few still running funds. They'd sit together and laugh about the old days, The chaos of the pit, the smell of adrenaline, the absurd confidence of youth. They often said, "You changed our lives." But Dennis would shake his head gently. "No," he said, "I only showed you a mirror. You changed your own." That humility, once hidden beneath ambition, had finally surfaced. Because deep down he had realized that every rule he'd ever created was not about markets. It was about mastering reaction. That's what his system was always meant to protect, the space between stimulus and response, the only space where freedom exists. He wrote, "The purpose of a system is not to predict the future, but to protect you from yourself when the future surprises you." That was the essence of wisdom, and it was that understanding that allowed him at last to forgive himself for the losses, for the pride, for the years of chasing control in a world that was never meant to be controlled. He said once, "When I was young, I wanted to beat the market. When I was older, I wanted to understand it. Now I just want to respect it." That respect became his peace. He began to teach again quietly in small circles, but this time he didn't speak of systems or signals. He spoke of temperament, of patience, of detachment. He'd ask his students, "Can you lose money without losing balance? Can you win without losing humility? Can you sit still when everything inside you screams to move?" Because that, not chart patterns, is where mastery lives. He reminded them that discipline isn't suppression, it's awareness, to see emotion without acting from it, to let the wave rise and fall without reaching for it. He said, "You don't need to kill fear, you need to learn its language." And that's what he left behind. Not formulas, but frameworks for thinking. Not profits, but perspective. In his last year, a journalist asked him what he thought of modern trading, of artificial intelligence, of machine learning, of algorithms making millions in milliseconds. He smiled and said, "They're faster than me, smarter than me, but they still can't feel the market, and that's both their strength and their weakness." He paused, then added, "Eventually, even machines will have to learn what we had to. That data, without doubt, is just noise." It was an answer so calm, so paradoxical, that it silenced the room, because it revealed something eternal, the idea that no matter how advanced the world becomes, the same human truths remain beneath it. The fear of loss, the hunger for control, the need for meaning. Richard Dennis had lived through it all, and finally he wasn't fighting it anymore. He spent his evenings in stillness, sometimes watching old charts, sometimes rereading philosophy, sometimes just listening to the quiet hum of the world outside his window. In one of his last notebooks, he wrote, "Markets are teachers disguised as chaos. They punish arrogance, reward patience, and forgive those who learn." That was his creed now, no longer about winning or losing, but about learning endlessly. And as his health declined, he seemed lighter, freer, almost serene. He had stopped measuring life in profits or percentages. He measured it in awareness, in peace, in stillness between thoughts. When he passed away, the news came softly, like everything else about him by then. No headlines screaming, no chaos, no noise, just a quiet acknowledgement among those who understood what he'd left behind. His students, now teachers themselves, gathered for a memorial. No flowers, no speeches, just silence, and a single chart projected on the wall. It wasn't a market chart, it was a sine wave, smooth, endless, rising and falling in perfect rhythm. One of them said quietly, "That's him." Because that curve, that endless rise and fall was his life, his philosophy, his truth. Up, down, learn, repeat. After the gathering, one student wrote, "He taught us how to make money. Then he taught us how to lose it gracefully. And finally, he taught us how to let go." That perhaps was the real ending of his story. Not a fall, not a triumph, but a transformation. Richard Dennis began as a trader, became a teacher, then became a mirror. And through that mirror, he showed the world a simple truth: that emotion will always live inside reason, that logic is only half of wisdom, and that the system you follow will never be stronger than the mind that follows it. He proved that wealth built on awareness endures longer than wealth built on chance. And though the markets move on, new faces, new names, new machines, his lessons still whisper beneath the noise. Control your reaction, trust your process, stay humble in victory, stay centered in loss. Because in the end, there is no secret formula, there is only awareness. And if you can hold that, not money, not fame, not pride, but awareness, then you have already won the only trade that truly matters: the trade between fear and understanding, the trade between control and peace, the trade between chaos and self. That is the final lesson of Richard Dennis, not the Prince of the Pit, but the philosopher of the mind. And as the markets continue their endless dance, somewhere in the silence between ticks and time, his words still echo, calm, measured, timeless. Emotion built the market, discipline built the fortune, awareness built the man.